So welcome. We are having this brown bag essentially to bring to a larger audience and make a recorded presentation of the results we've been hearing from different leadership dialogues. So we're going to essentially give an overview today of what we learned in our original dialogue, but there's also some updates as obviously these dialogues continue to happen in the movement, and we're of course anxious and excited to hear other people's experiences. So if you have a dialogue about leadership skills, please keep that in mind as we go on, and we'll have a time for discussion about midway through the hour. So we can go ahead and start the slide presentation. So what is leadership? When it came to leadership, we started asking questions actually internally a couple years ago when we looked at the programs and the types of leadership and capacity development that were being supported by the Wikimedia programs and the types that were being supported by affiliates or volunteer program leaders. And we realized there's lots of different kinds of leadership. And while we had started using this term program leaders for some of those folks we were trying to target for specific evaluation capacity development, it was really time to revisit not only that term, but also what the whole expanse of leadership needs was in the movement. While we don't necessarily know how to support all of those things, that we needed to have that conversation and actually start to expand our understanding of those skills that it takes to build and coordinate communities and projects beyond what we had been exposed to. So, next slide. What is leadership? We hear a lot of people refer to a common phrase of cat herding, that in our movement we do a lot of cat herding because everyone's sort of doing their own thing. And you have to wonder, what does cat herding mean? Does that mean, next slide, that leadership looks more like a leader at the front and everyone's all in line behind them then, and this is how we get our cats in order? Or is, next slide, or is leadership finding someone who's the most influential or impressive and everyone's going to follow what they say? We know different models of this. Next slide. In Wikimedia, this isn't the kind of leadership we see. We see leadership in all sorts of other ways. And Wikimedia is inherently leadership oriented. So in this session, we'll briefly present those themes that we found through the leadership dialogues and discuss the potential strategies for collaborating on ways we can better support a more expansive view of leadership, and we can understand the value of those different opportunities for skills development and better open up those opportunities across the movement. Next slide. So the learning objectives there, as I stated, learning results, identify opportunities from across the dialogues. Next slide. Turn it over to Maria for a little context.
So one of the main goals of community engagement is to help volunteer program leaders and affiliate coordinators with their own goals as efficiently and effectively as possible. We do this by giving them access to resources and also by building networks among them for peer exchange. We started developing capacity in program evaluation and design in 2013. 23 program leaders attended the first workshop then. Through 10 iterations of learning days, we have trained more than 250 community program leaders since that time. And in the same time frame, our team's focus has expanded from developing an evaluation portal to designing a single point of entry for all Wikimedia-related resources, the Wikimedia Resource Center, which you can see on the right of the screen. There are still a few areas of improvement. We would like to better assist community leaders to connect to other community members and their resources, and to create a more transparent and shared space for developing leadership within the movement.
Okay, so you've heard me mention this dialogue. Well, who was this, when, where, and what was it? Essentially, starting at the beginning of 2016, as part of our department's annual strategic conversations at our annual retreat time, we had some topics come up, and one of them was recognition and leadership, and how do we support the natural leadership in our movement better. And that's where we started with that initial conversation, and then we continued and expanded out to have a larger conversation across the foundation through our annual planning process that year. And then, of course, we continued with an in-person discussion at the Wikimedia conference in 2016, as well as at Wikimania in June 2016. After those basic conversations, we pushed the conversation out further to online consultation, where we shared what we had heard so far and posed specific questions for people to input further on. We got a lot of suggestions. We got a lot of input in terms of different theories and approaches that we could be more informed by. But we also heard a lot about the specific skills and the types of roles that were seen as leadership roles in the movement. So across all those initial conversations, we heard from about 100 participants, 21 of those being staff members and 79 of those being community members, who are in some sort of what we see as a leadership role, either leading an affiliate group and its programming, or a volunteer leader, maybe leading a GLAM partnership. Next slide, please. So beyond that, we've had other conversations as a result, and follow-up conversations, as other people have also been taking on this leadership capacity development as a sort of natural course in our movement's development. So we've also participated in the in-person conversations at Wikimedia conference this year and Wikimania this year, as well as participated in the board training workshop dialogue that was held at Wikimania. And a diversity leadership skills discussion just recently, a couple weeks ago at the diversity conference. So we've also included brief information for folks on what we heard at those points as well. Next slide. Oh, sorry. So here we'll spend about 20 minutes going over the review, then we'll have 15 minutes to identify potential resources or project groups that might be relevant for identifying skills. So if, as we're going, and you hear a certain skill or a certain role and you know of a resource, please keep that in mind or jot it down so you can be ready with that during discussion time. And then, of course, Maria's going to come back around and also link us back to, as she shared, the Wikimedia Resource Center. We have some strategies going on for how we can help to better connect people to skills resources, as well as to people resources for skills development. Okay, next slide. So, in general, leadership development, who should we support? Since we have people in the room, I'm just going to open up that question. Some of this might be obvious, some of this might be unique, and you might even say something we haven't heard yet. But what seems like some of the most obvious and the least obvious that people in the room or online are able to share?
People who, is there an answer, or are we supposed to give an answer?
Oh, we got lots of answers from the data.
Oh, that was an actual question.
Oh, no, it is.
Oh,
yeah.
it is.
Yeah. This is I've already been talking a lot, and we have 20 minutes to go over the data, but you guys are observers of data and experience too. So like when you think of leadership roles, what are the ones that come to mind that we work on developing skills for?
Organizers.
Organizers.
People who perceive themselves to be leaders, or who we perceive to be leaders.
Okay, so Katie's bringing up that whole perception thing, like they either perceive themselves or we perceive them. What other kinds of leadership roles do we see that we work to support?
Folks who get grants and funding for their
people who get grants.
activities.
Can anyone think of some of the leadership types that we have in our movement that we don't do much to support?
Committees.
Committees. Functionaries.
Yeah, I was going to say people who are elected or appointed to something.
Yeah.
Some kind of role.
Yeah. So we heard about a lot of different roles, and you're going to hear about them, and a lot of them we aren't doing anything at the foundation to directly support, but you'll also recognize that there are different community programs at times in different communities that do have some support because they built it. So what we heard we should be supporting people with responsibility. So this kind of fits with the functionaries, those people who fill the gaps and make the connections to keep the projects running, and those people with advanced user rights, and those public-facing people who actually represent the movement. So I think some of the people we see as leaders and perceive as leaders fit into this one.
Also on wiki curators, this means people who judge feature articles, article deletion groups, article watchers, reviewers and discussers, RFC drafters and leaders, people that start discussions that lead to calls to action, people that close discussions and write summaries, and patrollers.
Next slide. People who drive collaboration online. So people who work on overarching themes to make project groups, wiki project managers and wiki project coordinators, essentially the team players and connectors between projects to make something of a content in one project happen through some drive on another project. But really those folks who are doing the connecting online. Next slide. As well as the people who really drive that collaboration offline. And here you see a picture of last year's Wikimedia conference attendees. But really this extends beyond those affiliates to any community organizers, whether they be an affiliate or just an online language group or project group, to those community service volunteers that they're actually working with offline to try to build more participants and in a way that's more proactive. And of course, those regional representatives who are really trying to gather support across a region group or thematic group in ways that are connecting beyond the wiki space. Next slide.
And mentors and change makers. The suggestions that didn't fit in any of these categories are designers, grantees, people who could be leaders but do not see themselves as leaders, people who fill the gaps, people who just do it, people who others ask for advice, people who the community choose, two developers, very small communities, and co-ops. People who inspire, people who listen to others, people who motivate, tea house greeters, people who others have chosen to lead, change makers, diversity advocates. So, how should we refer to Wikimedia community leaders? We call community members who guide their communities and mentor their fellow Wikimedians leaders. But this word doesn't always translate well between languages and cultures. So this is why a second aim of this consultation was to gain a broader input in the language we use to talk about leaders and to better understand what makes a leader in the Wikimedia movement. So we had small focus groups where many community members show that they have a similar basic understanding of the leadership traits that we want to encourage in our movement. If we can better understand what traits our leaders share, we can encourage and develop this characteristic in new leaders. And in turn, this would result in strengthening communities and helping them become more sustainable. So, yeah.
Before we move on, I just want to point out that although we do hear a lot of resistance at times to the leader label, it did still surface as one of the most common things. So it's not like that's off all the time. But one of the things we most commonly heard of why they wanted other labels like coordinator or mentor, or that sometimes they don't want to have such a generic label that they could be expected to lead in all ways. And really they want to be able to focus their volunteer leadership to a specific role. And so that it's important to honor that with the label that's more specific at times. So really it does seem like something that should be considered depending on the audience group of folks in leadership roles that you're working with. Okay,
so what skills should be developed? Do we want to do a poll in the room again, or?
I think so, because we've got some folks who really have been working on developing skills here in person as well as on the Hangouts.
So any ideas about what skills we should be developing? Online answers welcome.
When you think about the wiki leader folks that you work with, and where they could be better supported, or where maybe they are really high functioning because they have a certain skill, what are those skills?
Public speaking, or I guess comfort with speaking in public might be facet of that.
You see that mostly with grantees, or?
No, I think I see that. I mean, conferences, people presenting was brought up as a lot of the examples. So standing up in front of a mic, in front of a group of people, if that skill shows up a lot.
Also just organizing a presentation, things like that on top of that.
Cool. I'm asking the chat. Katie Horn is thinking. Anything that has come up in your interactions with community members, maybe at different workshops or different conferences, things that people struggle with that they have communicated to you?
There are dozens of such skills.
Sorry?
There are dozens of such skills.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just one or two. I mean, from tool use to partnership negotiation, conflict resolution, really, there's dozens and dozens of such skills, and I'm doing some work right now on identifying them into a community capacity map. And I'm kind of wondering what would this feed into this input we're gathering right now? What decisions would that inform?
That's a great question. I think we're gonna take those questions towards the end of the session. But because at the moment we're trying to crowdsource what skills are important. Some things that came up in the chat. Delphine mentions reflecting on why they are doing things. That's a good point. Nick talks about mediation. That also came up in the room as well. Reading and establishing a budget. This is from Delphine again. Writing a strategy. Program design. Understanding your community. Identifying skills in their peers. It's funny that we already have some workshops targeting these skills. Avi says outreach to find more volunteers to participate in activities, how to motivate others to participate, which takes good communication plans. Cool. So a lot of very, very good ideas.
If I can interrupt and add one, I've been thinking about this question, and part of the problem is what are you going to do with it? Just like Asaf said. Because this leadership skill that stands out to me most on the wikis is personal maturity.
You sound like a robot.
Hold on a second. The audio is coming in really whack.
Is it better now?
Well, can someone else?
I'll just type it.
They talk from the Hangout to see if we're having a general problem.
I think it's just the room.
Test 1, 2, banana, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, we need to switch the speaker maybe in the Hangout. Is Brendan still with us helping?
Brendan is remoting in, so he's on it. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so in the meantime, maybe we can share it. Okay, Sherry was saying that the leadership that stands out to her on the wikis is personal maturity. But that's not something that you can really teach. That's a good point. There's different types of skills. Okay. I think we should be better in terms of audio from the Hangout.
Yeah. How does it sound right now?
Great.
Yes. Thank you. That was quick. Sherry, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, that's enough.
Okay. Anyone else would like to share from the hangout or from the room?
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Okay.
So knowing and learning about yourself.
Maybe just like a life skill.
Yeah.
The only one I was going to add is like something around like the ability to influence or like make an argument is a skill. Like to actually craft an argument with the intention of changing someone's mind or behavior or
Maria, I can't join the Hangout because it's full, but I sent you a link to the capacities I've identified. If you want to.
We can put them in the.
Would you like me to drop that in the chat?
It's an Office Wiki page, so non-staffers will not be able to see it, but you could maybe put it up and screen share if you want to discuss them. But like I said, it's dozens and dozens of capacities, so I don't know if you have time to discuss them.
Cool. So we have a few more comments from the chat. Nick, do you want to speak up since we have audio now? And we start from there.
I put everything in the chat really, but yeah, in the context of Brandon Harris's design for evil point, leaders often struggle with discouraging hack collectors, which are often very young, over-enthusiastic people who try to become additional leaders but aren't actually capable of learning the required skills within a reasonable period of time.
Cool. And some people are resonating with that on the chat as well. And an example that Delphine is giving is chapter board members in 3 committees and organizing a conference, etc. Cool. So
we're getting on to actual team building.
Actual team building,
which is a great lead-in to what we heard the most.
Okay, so with that, we're going to share what we heard from community members. So, how to be collaborative? There were 28 suggestions that fell into this category, highlighting the importance of supporting development skills for distributing responsibility, facilitating consensus, inviting people to engage, liaising with others.
The second most common thing that was actually brought up was how to keep a positive mentality. So suggestions like understanding when to be bold and knowing that it's good to have boldness, specifically commitment and flexibility and patience were mentioned a lot, as well as perseverance, resilience, and even self-sacrifice. So this might strike some as surprising, but very much in our spaces to be a leader, people feel much of the same sorts of things that you would feel as you were sort of chipping away and leading in a workspace. Importantly, there's other ways, of course, to a positive mentality that may not have been identified here, that have, I know I heard some talk about reflection and self-awareness. Of course, that might also be contributors to having a positive mentality. But that was the second most common area, was sort of having the resilience factors to be able to continue to volunteer and lead, because suddenly it becomes a bigger bundle of joy. Or not. Yes.
How to teach and inspire. There were 18 suggestions that fell into this category, highlighting the importance of supporting development for skills for mentoring, peer encouragement, guiding adults and international volunteers, recruiting, motivating, empowering, and bringing people along.
Of course, another popular area of need that we all know, actually because people have been asking for project management tools for a very long time, and it's not something we generally focus on, But 16 of the suggestions across the group were really about project management, having tools for project coordination and know-how for project coordination, as well as that community organizing, which I know was mentioned by a couple of the suggestions here in the room and online. But being able to prioritize was another skill that was identified by a lot of people, and actually it's not something we don't see as we review our own sort of vision and strategic work. This tends to be something that people say, how do we get more prioritized? So it seems to be a general skills area that people need across the movement of volunteer leadership. And of course, monitoring and documentation was another one. And of course, this also makes sense because we know we have a lot of documentation throughout the movement, but we don't necessarily monitor that documentation, and it doesn't necessarily get curated or updated or even archived when it needs to be. And that this is an important aspect of project management that they need more support in skills development as well as their systems.
People skills. There were 15 suggestions in this category, suggesting the importance to develop skills such as conscientiousness, communication, emotional intelligence, interpersonal relations, identifying volunteer strengths and weaknesses, listening, maintaining relationships, skills to diffuse mistakes.
And of course, at the end of those groupings, we had 10 suggestions also fall into the category of essentially staying true to our values, references to those values that we find important in the movement, specifically naming things like being constructive, showing appreciation, and having empathy, being inclusive, being open, both in open-mindedness as well as transparency, trustworthiness and being trusting, assuming good faith, and bringing humility as well as boldness. And of course, next slide is where we get into some of the board skills that we heard when Cornelius and Franz led the session at Wikimedia, connecting between events, and the board's training has been going on now for a few years as a pre-conference to the Wikimedia conference, as well as the days, same days as learning days. This last year, the affiliations committee actually supported a few more folks to be able to attend who aren't part of annual plan grant funded chapters, so that this would be an opportunity given to boards that were less established, even so that they could get some basic onboarding skills. One of the most important skills identified at that follow-through session was that's really important to continue the current focus on the onboarding issues for board members, which has been up to now. But we also heard some of those things that we're hearing across the leadership dialogue more generally, that they also need support with communication skills, even language skills, and how to level the language we're presenting. Mediation training was named explicitly, as well as diversity and inclusion training. People want to know, how are they to be more inclusive? How can they invite diversity? They know it's a goal, they agree with it, but they don't necessarily have the skills and approaches for the practices to get there. Next slide is Maria's.
And we also had a chance to talk about what skills leaders who are focusing on diversity in the Wikimedia movement need support in. And the skills that came up there were facilitation of conversations, nonviolent communication, anti-harassment training, how to liaise, how to advocate, project management, how to prototype, and how to pilot.
Nice question. When you say diversity leadership skills, do you mean about skills all leaders should have for inclusive diversity, or to be more inclusive and more diverse? Or are you talking about keep a specific set of people? I'm not clear by what you mean.
The leadership skills needed to support diversity.
So all leaders. Thanks.
Okay, so
leadership development. We know we're supporting it in some cases. Asaf has his growing pilot program, I believe. It's still in the pilot phase, but They're doing more mapping, obviously. We also have expanded learning days to allow for leadership skills as are defined by the design survey by participants, and are working to connect the right folks from either our community presenters or our internal staff who have expertise in different areas in that format as well. We also know other people are doing things that might be less on the grid or are more in the plans for next year. But at this point, we'd like to sort of talk about how else we should be supporting it. Obviously, we've named some types of leadership that are not audiences we support at all. And some we support somewhat, like some committees have some support and other committees have none. Of course, we do have some other suggestions from the conversations we've had so far. And those fall into two general categories. One is the focus on empowering leaders, and the other is the focus on actually creating online opportunities and resources for people to access things evenly online. So if that helps you to sort of frame your own thinking, here are the top things we heard. And we'd love to hear from everybody here. What do you see as other areas that we should be helping to support that we're not? Go for it.
Yeah. One thing that struck me throughout this presentation is that I started to see a difference between like leadership and leaders. So like there are skills generally that have to do with leadership, and perhaps those don't necessarily identify with people who are at the, as you said, like at the forefront, right? Organizing things or coordinating things or being the heads of whatever. And so I guess my question is, in what ways are we in general supporting those basic skills that seem to cut across those who might identify as leaders and those who don't? And then second to that is actually for those who do identify as leaders and who do, let's say, want to grow in that capacity, that's kind of an addition to. Does that make sense, this distinction that I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Because I think when you talked about on-wiki curators, I was thinking about there's so many of them, right? They sit in all these different geographies, they're all these different places. This is not really one where you say, oh, there's a systematic training, right, that everyone has to take. This is more about like skills that cut across many spaces. And so in what ways are we encouraging and supporting leadership skills feels a little bit different than in what ways are we encouraging and supporting the people who identify as leaders. I think they're overlapping, but not totally the same.
Right, so that's a question.
Yeah,
and also there's the question of when you saw on the slide that was back, it's actually we in quotes, because we doesn't mean just the foundation. Like we is the movement wide. Like we already know that the foundation doesn't support editor training. That's supported by like volunteers and affiliates for the most part, and through online programs like the Tea House and the Adventure, Wikipedia Adventure, things like that have been tried, obviously, as well. But I think that's an important point. Like, should we be focused on those who identify as leaders, or should we be focused on the leadership skills? Like, because what we heard when we opened this dialogue to communities, and a great deal of the reason we heard it, we heard about these other roles because people feel like we have only been supporting a certain type of leadership. And so I think that's a question, like what proportion of our energy should be like at scalable leadership skills that are needed, or should that be something that is like an affiliate's role? Is that something that is some other role that would help to actually identify and label and call it something in the movement so that people see the gap and are able to fill it? Which starts to sort of bring into what is the outcome of these conversations. There's no set outcome. We are in the middle of movement strategy conversations all around. At this point, we don't quite have the outline for phase 2, but we know that these things about roles are going to be coming up. And we know that we expect to support more infrastructure of people and connections between them as we build out into a real worldwide global movement. And so regardless of that, these questions are going to be pertinent, and this information hopefully will continue to grow and help guide folks to think about the gaps that you might not be seeing. As people and are seeing people build in a grant maybe for capacity development in their community, being able to spot leadership development, and being able to sort of open up this conversation in our view of what we're doing, so that as we build out different supports as a movement and with different roles and responsibilities, that we're keeping attention to be doing this with equity. So that's the goal, and that's why we'll continue this conversation. It's not over, as evidenced by our continued collection of inputs from other leadership conversations. So at this point, it's time to open it up for general discussion, and then we have up to 15 minutes for that, in terms of where you see potential roles opening up, or needs or gaps that might need filled, ideas for how we might fill those strategically or with infrastructure.
There's a question. Nick, can you speak up your question, please?
And then Chuck.
Sure. In that slide, I was just wondering, are the points on the left meant to be connected to the points on the right?
I know, right? It's like music.
Like bebop.
Nick, you sounded like you were beboping. It was really cool.
Okay, so
You got it.
is there meant to be a connection between the two columns? The right-left justified alignment made it seem as if there was, but the contents of both seem distinct about this slide.
Yeah, so the contents under the header on the right go to that header, and the contents under the header on the left go to that header. So those are the different groups. So one is about what to do online opportunities and resource-wise. So yeah.
Sound okay now?
So that means trying to do those things online and through online resources.
Test 1 2 1 2. Can you hear me?
Oh, I think, Nick, you're talking again.
Test 1 2. Can you hear me?
Sound is not working. So.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Brandon.
Or it could be someone else talking. I can't see at the moment.
Oh, he has he recommends aligning them differently so it doesn't look like there's a connection between one and the other.
Across the way. Okay. Thanks for the tip. Chuck, over to you for your.
Yeah. So, a lot of these are areas that people have identified about, like, ways that they want to improve their skills. And what I wonder is, like, are there adequate means for people to identify what areas they need to improve, or, like, are most important, right? Like, and I wonder if we have like adequate feedback mechanisms and things for people in leadership positions to learn from that and learn, like, what didn't go well for a particular project or in a particular role.
Yeah, we don't really have set systems. I know we've had a few sessions of Failfest at Learning Days to address some of this. I know other people do sort of debrief processes, but we don't have anything systematic. That's a really good point in terms of having some sort of feedback, or like even just a way to say, hey, this is a problem I had, and get more data on occurrence.
I think, and I could be wrong, that but I could be wrong, people who are in the annual plan programs, both FDC and Simple APG, probably do get more interaction with their program officer. And I'm guessing that Winifred's probably direct about what kind of leadership skills need to be developed and working with those people. So once folks have gotten to the point where they're going for annual plans, then that's one space where they do it. When they're in different grant programs, they do reporting after projects about what went well and what didn't, but we don't have as many conversations about, okay, what can we do? What is missing for you as a leader? I mean, we can point out again and again, okay, you need to prioritize. Let me help you prioritize, and get nowhere. But I think one of the other issues that I see sometimes, especially with the groups that are getting more active, is that they need to diversify leadership, that maybe one person is getting like too strong and maybe shouldn't be. And there's not a great way to call that out right now. It would be great if there were ways that we could give that kind of feedback to groups, like, okay, what can we do to help you stabilize more in the long term?
which is sort of thinking of leadership as like groups, and which is right, collective leadership for a particular, whether it's project or chapter or whatever, as opposed to individual leadership.
Well, I think you see individual leadership within projects or chapters.
Right. Yeah.
But then as you look at those growing, seeing, okay, you're going to need more people to support this, or potentially there's a leader who brings toxic elements to a group and can become really problematic, and it's hard to monitor for that, and also hard to give people that input from the outside because we don't really have that kind of relationship.
Yeah, we've seen that as we've opened up the leadership track and done the design survey somewhat differently to get at what are those leadership skills most needed. We continue to see mediation and facilitation, consensus conversation, those types of skills specifically get requested because for the most part, who we've been working with, essentially once they are leading, they do tend to grow their leadership to a sort of group level, and it does become beyond the project where you have to share ownership, and that does seem to be where most of this surface is, and it seems to be a general pattern for most of our communities that at some point they get to organizing, either online or off. And of course, we have a little less insight, I think, on some of the online organizing that goes on.
So we have a few comments. Abby, do you want to try and speak? Maybe the audio was fixed.
I'm shy. I don't want to hurt your ears.
No, it wasn't.
Can you hear me okay?
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Yeah, I was just thinking about that there's so many different types of support. I'm wondering if the support could be provided in fact.
She's telling the room, and the YouTube is getting it fine, I think.
What?
I wonder if there are some kinds of help that are well provided through text. Others that should be
quietly because we're interrupting.
You can't hear me? Oh, okay.
We can't hear you right now, unfortunately. No, it's just an us problem.
It's just the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what to do from here. You could read my text, the note.
Okay.
It sounds like Brendan came in and is wrangling the audio for us.
Yeah.
Hello.
We can hear you. Hi. We can hear you.
Yay. Okay, great. I can't see the room anymore, but maybe that's okay. What I was talking about in my note was thinking about there are various types of support and various ways to support people. So sometimes people could get support through text. Some things may be okay to communicate through written word. Some might need, maybe a little bit more information on the signal. So maybe a video for some sort of training or support. And I'm wondering if, of course, some needs to be in person. There's some things that in person for learning. I'm wondering if there's a way that teams, community leadership can assess their leadership together, or as an individual assess their own self. Are there methods for assessment? And then when they find out what they need training in, they could go to some kind of a menu to ask for the support they need or to gather it. It's just kind of a blue sky thinking thing, because I know there are constraints, but that's it. That's my idea.
Other ideas in the room or online? There are some comments on the YouTube stream. Let's see. Jeffrey Kiefer, who attended Learning Days for the first time at Wikimedia, says looking for opportunities to involve Newbie energy and intentionally develop them into the next wave of leadership and responsibility. And some comments about the audio. Sorry about that. Anonymous Wikipedian says leadership shouldn't be connected with domination with communities. When this happens, the communities become toxic workplaces and harassment and bullying events happen.
So on, I know there's going to be a slight delay on Jeffrey's question. I'm wondering as a follow-up if he means Newbie Energy for leadership development or Newbie Energy in general for like projects and things. Like, does he? Yeah.
I'm sure he's hearing that. He would probably post a response soon.
And as far as the potential of communities having problems and being certain community groups in disagreement, that's definitely something that does happen. And sometimes there are serious conflicts between two different groups in community, either in the same country or in the same thematic area. And of course, we are looking to improve the way we deal with those things and support those conflict mediations as well. That very much is one of the points, I think, in most people's mind as they name that conflict mediation and consensus building skills gap. And of course, that's one of the areas that we've been working to address. I know both SOF's program addresses some of those skills as well as Learning Base has begun to have those skills development content points too.
Jackie, who took part in the diversity conference, also has a comment. And she was part of the conversation about what are leadership skills for diversity. She says people don't know the support for leadership skills they need, and knowing the skills of leadership is a privilege. Another comment from
Can I just respond to that for?
Yeah.
That reminds me a little bit of what Chuck was bringing up of like, and I think a few others about like self-assessment, kind of self-awareness, self-reflection, getting feedback, kind of knowing perhaps where you are and what skills you have and what levels and maybe what you might want to develop. Seems like a really critical precursor to any kind of development, right? I think right now the question was focused on like how do we support people? What do we develop? But I think I think people are pointing out that there's a missing kind of like first step of like internal self-reflection and understanding and awareness before the development.
Yeah, I think that's something we also see in smaller communities versus larger communities. The input and like they know they need to do something, but they have no idea what skills it would require to do that thing. So it's not a question of how do I get this skill, but how do I solve this problem? As well, sorry, is there more questions? Or more comments?
There's more
Let's
comments.
make sure we get to this.
So another comment from Jeffrey that was +1 by Abigail Kabunok, who's the coordinator of the leadership program the Wikimedia Foundation has, is about mentoring. Mentoring is really, really valuable opportunity to promote leadership while also establishing and building community. And Abby says, it's also a nice way to get leaders to multiply themselves. So it's not just us teaching everyone these skills, which is what we were trying to go towards with the leadership track.
Yes. Okay, so the other point following on with the not knowing quite what skills it takes, this was also something that I think we got to impart with some of the program toolkits and knowing like it would be helpful for people to know what they're going to need on this. I also know that it's something that was identified in Idea Lab, that there's certain roles to be in a project and sort of identifying those skills and those roles may also be something that would be helpful just as a sort of mapping project to bring equity to the knowing what skills and getting rid of some of that privilege there.
Liam Wyatt highlights that regarding the definition of leadership, Wikimedia UK has a metric in their annual plan that they have had it for the last 2 years of leading volunteers. which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. And Jackie is saying again that one of the biggest takeaways she had from the diversity conference was that leadership skills and comfort vary culturally. They may mean different things in different contexts.
Yes, that's very true. And leadership could look completely different from one culture to the next.
I have something I could add if there's no one in the queue.
There's one more person.
Oh, sure.
Katie, do you want to speak up? I think we're good with audio.
Is this working? Hello.
Yes.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, it's not a very complicated thought, I don't think, but one thing that I would love to see people who consider themselves to be leaders to do more of all the time is just develop more leaders. I think there's something nice about having that mentality of like, okay, how do I make myself not necessary in this process?
+1.
Yes, rounds of +1 probably.
Is this building on what you wanted to say, Casey, or do you want to share something else?
It's unrelated-ish, I think. So this was an idea that James Hare has talked to me about before, and then I know Washington Wikimedia DC has done, where he said that they've had like competitive application processes to choose people to take part in like more in-depth training, and specifically on meeting facilitation. I think it was a 2 or 3 day thing. But he was really stressing that the competitive process for doing that was important because it got people who were really committed to it. They had a grant to do this. And culturally, I think there are enough similarities within the US that this was something that worked out pretty well. Anyway, 2 years after that, they said that more than half of the people who had participated, so that was, I think 9 or 10 people, were leading projects all over the US, were really like well-recognized people within our movement, had taken on committee roles, were visible at Wikimedia and other places facilitating sessions and so forth. So I'd really like to see us move in a direction where we can encourage more groups, either encouraging them by saying, hey, maybe you should do a call for people within your communities or within a couple of communities, but also helping them think about how they could plan that and set that kind of thing up, sort of outside of learning days, but doing like a deeper dive into one particular leadership skill that may be really important for most groups across our movement. And I understand facilitation probably is usually in high demand. So that was a really great example from James Hare that I know he would share if he were here.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
I've benefited from it quite a bit.
Tati, did you have another one, or you just?
No, I was just +1ing.
Thumbs up.
Silently. Not so silently now.
Okay. All right. Well, this does bring us to the point. It's our last 5 minutes are upon us. I'm going to turn it over again to Maria to share with us some of the ideas that we have for ways we can start connecting, at least through the Wikimedia Resource Center on these skills. So she can give you an update of where we're at in the current phase of development and prototyping, and how you can be a part of that or not, depending on your interests.
Yes, so to do that, I'm going to very quickly share screen again. Let me see. It's hectic to facilitate the meeting and present it. So as we were saying before, the Wikimedia Resource is a single point of entry, which you should be able to see in the screen right now. It's a single point of entry for all Wikimedia related resources. We are developed this version 2, which filters resources by user personas that we have identified as the target audiences. And we are now testing a prototype of what the connecting features are on the Wikimedia Resource Center. So if you go to this area, this is what it looks like right now. We are reaching out to groups proactively to show them how they can document or add their group on Meta Wikimedia and add their own profiles, which could be useful to follow up on issues and resources that you have for this group on Meta Wikimedia. So one group that really took to it was the Wikimedia Diversity group. I created a group and I shared it with them, and they started adding themselves here. And very soon we will start posting new comments with the conversation that is ongoing for that group. That is the outcome of the conference that recently took place. So this is how we hope to support people and to create these networks, showing who is out there. A picture is not mandatory, but a link to a username that people can leave a message on is highly advised, because that's how people can contact other people and start understanding how the ropes are moved and where to apply for things and where to ask for advice. So yeah, I think that is all to show the Wikimedia Resource Center. It's in a very early stage of development. Yeah, for connecting features. I think there are more comments on the YouTube stream that I want to go back to. So Fahid is talking again about 4 families of skills: interpersonal, interpersonal, group, social management, and technical skills tools. Jeffrey is responding to Newbie energy can be guided and fostered in many ways. While it likely leads to projects and hands-on work initially, having an eye on success planning and intentionally developing others is valuable. And Abigail is +1 in that successor planning is so important in a sustainable community, and Jackie is also +1 in that. Liam says that regarding the comment of making a person not necessary, his self-definition of success for a Wikipedian in residence at the British Museum was, when I leave and no one notices because the activities keep going. And Andrew Lee is making a comment to Casey about the competitive application process. He says that competitive applications are good to make sure folks are committed. But it should be paired with invitation culture and targeting and asking specific folks.
Yeah, I think the targeting, asking people. I'd have a question to add to that is, what role can we play at the foundation? What role can groups like AFCOM play to identify potential future leaders? Maybe that's a challenge for different groups. But as we get to know people, saying, hey, this is a person who I think would benefit from more development. Because I don't know what ways there are now besides asking them to join a committee and then just abusing them at work.
Yeah, I think that recognition question is really important. How do we recognize who's leading and in what ways, and how do we be more even? Well, not necessarily even, but equitable in the way we're supporting folks.
Well, the question is not just recognizing them then, but then the next step of supporting them to take something where someone in their own community may not see it, may not be open to diversifying leadership, or may not know what to recommend. I personally don't usually know what to recommend someone promising, like, well, you should do this next thing, but I'd love to see a pathway to put them down.
Well, that does bring us to the end of the hour. I do thank everybody for your active comments and inputs. That doesn't need to be the end of it, of course. Maybe we should start a group in the Connect page just for this content topic. of course, I imagine this will come up in different conversations for different folks as you move forward with different phase 2 conversations. Hopefully this recording will be useful, and we'll also make sure to get this version of the deck up on Commons shortly. Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for joining, and sorry that it took us longer to get to the comments on YouTube. But thanks for joining and for the great